Long before David wore a crown, he carried a shepherd's staff. In the hills of Bethlehem, far from palaces and praise, David learned the quiet lessons that would shape his soul. As the youngest son of Jesse, he was often overlooked, sent into the fields while his brothers stood tall before men. Yet it was there, among the sheep, that God was forming a king. David watched over the flock day and night. He led them to water, guarded them from danger, and searched for the ones that wandered away. When wild animals came against them, David did not flee. He stood his ground, trusting that the Lord who created heaven and earth would also protect him. Each victory in the field strengthened his faith, teaching him that God was his strength and shield. In those long hours alone, David sang songs to the Lord. He lifted his voice beneath the open sky, praising God for his faithfulness. These songs would later become psalms, cries of joy, trust, and surrender. Though unseen by the world, David was being prepared by God. One day, the prophet Samuel came to Bethlehem, sent by God to anoint a new king. Jesse presented his sons, strong and confident, yet the Lord rejected them. God reminded Samuel that he does not look at outward appearance, but at the heart. At last, David was called in from the fields, before his family and elders. Samuel poured oil over David's head, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon him with power. David returned to the fields changed forever, carrying a promise he did not yet understand. Soon after, Israel found itself paralyzed with fear. The Philistines stood on one hill, Israel on another, and between them walked a giant named Goliath. Day after day, Goliath mocked Israel and defied the living God. Soldiers trembled, but David's heart burned with faith. He could not understand why no one would defend God's honor. David stepped forward with only a sling and 5 smooth stones. He declared that the battle belonged to the Lord. With a single stone, the giant fell, and the enemy fled. In that moment, Israel saw that deliverance comes from God alone. David's victory brought him into the presence of King Saul. He served faithfully, playing music to calm the king's troubled spirit and fighting bravely in battle. The people praised David, and songs were sung of his victories. But where David's faith grew, Saul's heart hardened, jealousy took root, and the king turned against the servant he once welcomed. David fled for his life. He hid in caves, crossed deserts, and lived as an outlaw. Men in distress gathered around him, and David became their leader. Though hunted and weary, David refused to harm Saul when given the chance. He trusted God's timing, believing that the Lord who anointed him would one day fulfill his promise. After years of waiting and sorrow, Saul's reign came to an end. David was crowned king, first over Judah, and then over all Israel. The shepherd had become a ruler, not by force, but by God's design. David united the tribes and established Jerusalem as the capital, making it both a political and spiritual center of the nation. Under David's leadership, Israel grew strong, enemies were defeated, justice was restored, and the nation prospered. David brought the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. Rejoicing before the Lord with all his heart, he desired to build a permanent house for God. But the Lord spoke of a greater promise. God declared that David's house would endure forever. From his lineage would come a king whose reign would never end. This covenant marked David's life with eternal significance, tying his story to God's plan for redemption. Yet even at the height of power, David was not beyond temptation. In a moment of weakness, he committed grave sin and attempted to hide it. But God, rich in mercy, sent the prophet Nathan to confront him. David's heart broke. He confessed his sin, humbled himself, and cried out for forgiveness, though the consequences were painful. The Lord forgave him. David's later years were marked by deep sorrow. His own household was filled with conflict, rebellion, and loss. A son rose against him, and David fled Jerusalem once more. Yet even then, David placed his hope in God. He wept, prayed, and trusted that the Lord's will would prevail. In time, David returned to Jerusalem. Though aged and weary, his faith remained strong. He prepared materials for the temple and gave instructions for the future of Israel. Knowing his time was short, David passed the throne to his son Solomon, trusting God to fulfill every promise. David's life came to an end, but his legacy endured. From shepherd to king, From triumph to repentance, David's story reveals a God who shapes hearts, forgives failure, and keeps his covenant.